The Intergalactic Combat Academy loomed over the horizon of Trinivir's cratered surface, its training ships descending through the thin atmosphere like metallic raindrops. Spring recruitment cycle had begun. Vessels from 100 star systems converged on the moon's landing platforms, disgorging would-be warriors of every conceivable species. Among them, a solitary human girl waited her turn to disembark. Kayla Wynn stood motionless at the top of the transport ramp, surveying the bustling hangar below. Unlike the other cadets with their augmented limbs and ceremonial weapons, she carried nothing but a small standard-issue duffel. Her slight frame and unassuming posture drew no attention, exactly as she preferred. The monitoring screens along the corridor flickered as she took her first step onto Academy grounds. A momentary darkness swept across every display panel, then vanished. Officers looked up from their tablets, confused. Technicians tapped diagnostic commands. No one connected the glitch to the quiet human who had just arrived. "Form ranks by sector designation," bellowed a voice that seemed to rattle the very walls. Drill Sergeant Zoran strode into view, his four-armed silhouette cutting an imposing figure against the artificial lights. His exoskeleton gleamed with military-grade enhancements. Sensor arrays embedded in his thorax pulsing with each thunderous footfall. The cadets scrambled to order, grouping themselves according to their origin systems. Kayla found her place at the end of Earth's delegation, a group of 3, including herself. The smallest contingent by far. Sergeant Zoran moved methodically down the line, scanner in hand, checking registration credentials against the Academy database. When he reached Kayla, the device emitted a shrill warning tone. "Identification verified, but biometric anomaly detected," he announced, loud enough for nearby cadets to hear. "No biomodification signature present. Explain yourself. Cadet." Kayla looked up at him, meeting his compound eyes without flinching. "No modifications, Sergeant," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Standard human baseline." Murmurs rippled through the assembly. A reptilian cadet several spots down snickered audibly. "Earth is sending children now? Unmodified ones at that?" Zoran raised one of his 4 hands for silence. "Academy Regulation 578 established last cycle. All cadets must undergo baseline enhancement to meet minimum combat reflexes." His sensory antennae flicked forward, scanning Kayla more thoroughly. "You are in violation of protocol." "With respect, Sergeant," Kayla replied, still quiet but unwavering. Earth's delegation was informed the regulation contained grandfather provisions for candidates already in the application pipeline. The drill sergeant's mandibles clicked in irritation. "Step out of formation. Cadet Wynn. Report to medical for immediate evaluation. I question your capacity to survive the first phase of training, let alone graduate." Kayla stepped forward, face impassive. As she moved, the lights flickered again just for an instant. "The rest of you proceed to orientation," Zoran commanded, already turning away. "Cadet Wynn will join if cleared by medical." The first week passed with agonizing slowness. Medical had eventually cleared Kayla for basic training, with numerous notations of concern, but the damage to her reputation was already done. Varix, the reptilian cadet who had mocked her during inspection, had made it his personal mission to remind everyone of the fragile Earther in their midst. His scaled hide bore proud evidence of genetic enhancement, an armored dermal layer that could withstand small arms fire. Next to him, Kayla's soft human skin seemed as vulnerable as tissue paper. "How many bones will you break in combat simulation tomorrow?" he taunted during mess hall. "I'm starting a betting pool. I say all of them." His table erupted in laughter. Kayla continued eating, not acknowledging the barb. "The quiet ones are always the first to wash out," called another voice, a silicon-based cadet whose crystalline form refracted light in dazzling patterns. Or break down crying for their parental units. More laughter. Kayla finished her meal in silence, returned her tray to the processing unit, and left without a word. The instructors were little better than the cadets. During the first combat orientation, Kayla found herself relegated to a secondary training ring, away from the main group exercises. Safety protocols, explained the combat instructor, a former Centaurian war chief with more augmentations than original body parts. Until you're enhanced, you'll train on modified parameters. What he meant was simplified exercises, reduced resistance, child's play. The message was clear: she didn't belong. While the other cadets practiced with gravity-amplified resistance bands and neural feedback combat simulators, Kayla was assigned to basic stance work and primitive striking techniques. The segregation only fueled Varix's mockery. "Look at the Earth doll, playing soldier," he called across the training floor. But someone else was watching too. Kalen, an insectoid cadet from the Altair system, had noticed something unusual. During low-light drills, when the training room was dim to simulate night operations, Kayla moved differently. While others struggled to adjust their enhanced vision modules, she navigated the darkness with fluid precision, each movement measured, economical. She seemed to flow through the shadows like water. "Did you see that?" Kalen whispered to his bunkmate. "Lycerin. The human. She's breathing in patterns that match the cadence of the exercise, like she's keeping time with an internal metronome." Lycerin, a bioluminescent humanoid, dimmed her natural glow to better observe. "Perhaps she's counting in her head." "No," Kalen insisted. "It's more than that. Watch her feet. She's not just following the program sequence, she's anticipating it." The rumors began circulating that evening. Some cadets claimed they'd spotted Kayla in the archives after hours, silently reviewing centuries of combat footage. Others said she practiced alone in the auxiliary training rooms when everyone else was sleeping. A maintenance worker swore he'd seen her executing perfect form in complete darkness, as if she could see through walls. But Kayla herself said nothing, acknowledged nothing. For her part, Kayla was fighting an internal battle more challenging than any physical training. Every instinct, honed through years of preparation before she ever set foot on Trinivir, told her to remain unnoticed, to blend in. Extraordinary performance would invite scrutiny, questions she couldn't answer. Yet with each passing day, the isolation wore on her. The segregated training meant she was falling behind in team exercises. If she couldn't integrate with a squad, she would fail the Academy's core requirement, unified combat operations. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. "Silence is your power, little one. Let them underestimate you until the moment it matters." But when would that moment come? And would she recognize it when it did? At night, alone in her bunk, Kayla reviewed the day's lessons in her mind, mentally correcting her form, visualizing the movements she'd been barred from practicing. Her fingers traced invisible patterns on her blanket, combat algorithms, timing sequences, force distribution calculations. The third week brought the announcement everyone had been dreading, the field survival test on Zareth 9. "Listen up, maggots!" Sergeant Zoran's voice boomed through the assembly hall. "Zareth 9 is no vacation spot. It's a Class 4 hostile environment with indigenous predators that would consider each of you a delicious snack." Hollow projections materialized above the podium, showing terrain maps of the barren moon, jagged rock formations, dust storms, and thermal signatures of large creatures appeared in succession. You will be dropped in teams of 4 at separate landing zones. Your objective: survive 72 hours and reach the extraction point with your team intact. Zoran's mandibles clicked with what might have been anticipation. Each team will be provided with standard survival gear, emergency beacons, and one heavy weapon. Murmurs of excitement rippled through the cadets. The field test was legendary, the first real challenge that separated potential warriors from washouts. Team assignments are as follows. Zoran began reading from his datapad. Names and squad designations appeared on the main screen. Kayla watched, expressionless, as group after group formed, without her. Finally, at the end, Cadet Win, solo deployment. The room fell silent. Sergeant? One of the instructors stepped forward, concern evident in his voice. Regulations require minimum team size of... Exception granted by Academy Command, Zoran interrupted, not looking up from his datapad. Cadet Win will deploy alone, with modified objectives. Kayla felt every eye in the room turn toward her. Solo deployment was unheard of for first-year cadets. It was either a death sentence or... Cadet Win will be granted standard survival gear only. No heavy weapons allocation. Zoran finally looked up, his compound eyes fixing directly on Kayla. Report to Hangar Bay 7 at 0500 hours. Dismissed. As the assembly dispersed, theories exploded among the cadets. They're setting her up to fail, whispered one. Or giving her a chance to prove herself, countered another. Either way, she won't last 12 hours on Zareth without enhancements. Varix declared with a smug grin. The dust storms alone will shred her unmodified lungs. Kayla walked past them all, her face betraying nothing. But inside, her mind was already calculating, planning, preparing. She had studied every available record on Zareth 9 during her late-night archive sessions. She knew its seasonal patterns, predator behaviors, terrain challenges. More importantly, she knew something none of them did. She had been preparing for this moment her entire life. The deployment shuttle shuddered as it entered Zareth 9's turbulent atmosphere. Through the viewport, Kayla could see the moon's surface, a bleak landscape of rust-colored rock and swirling dust clouds. The other cadets in the shuttle were secured in their harnesses, checking equipment, making last-minute adjustments to their enhancements. Kayla sat alone near the rear hatch, eyes closed, breathing steady. Her fingers tapped an imperceptible rhythm against her thigh, counting down the seconds to landfall. Final approach to Drop Zone Alpha, announced the pilot. Teams 1 through 3 prepare for deployment. The first groups of cadets moved to the deployment bay, nervous energy evident in their enhanced musculature. They were imposing figures, armored, augmented, armed with pulse rifles and survival gear. One by one, the teams dropped onto the surface of Zareth 9, their descent jets flaring against the alien twilight. Drop Zone Echo, Cadet Win, prepare for solo deployment. Kayla opened her eyes and stood. The remaining cadets watched her with a mixture of pity and curiosity as she moved to the hatch. Her pack contained the bare minimum: water purifier, emergency rations, basic medical supplies, and a standard-issue combat knife. No enhanced gear, no heavy weapons, not even a sidearm. A deployment in 3, 2, 1. The hatch opened and Kayla stepped into the void. Her descent was controlled, measured. Unlike the other cadets with their powered assist systems, she relied on old-fashioned parachute technology, guiding her fall with subtle shifts in body position. She landed softly on the rocky surface, immediately rolling to absorb impact and coming up in a defensive crouch. The shuttle was already a dwindling speck above her, leaving her truly alone on the alien moon. Kayla took a moment to assess her surroundings. Drop Zone Echo was situated at the edge of a vast canyon, rocky outcroppings providing potential shelter. The air was thin but breathable, tinged with metallic particles that glinted in the light of the distant sun. Most cadets would head for higher ground to establish a vantage point. It was standard procedure, taught in basic survival courses. Kayla did the opposite. She descended into the canyon, moving with deliberate stealth along its shadowed floor, her grandmother's voice guiding her thoughts. Where others seek advantage, find the unexpected path. The canyon offered three critical resources the exposed highlands did not: protection from dust storms, consistent temperature, and most importantly, reduced radiation exposure. Xerath 9's weak magnetic field meant surface radiation levels fluctuated wildly. Down here, the rock walls provided natural shielding. By nightfall, Kayla had established a minimal camp in a shallow cave. No fire. Heat signatures would attract predators. Instead, she relied on body heat conservation techniques, wrapping herself in the thermal blanket from her pack in a specific folding pattern that maximized retention. The first night passed uneventfully. At dawn, she packed her meager camp and continued deeper into the canyon network, following a path only she could see, minute changes in rock coloration that indicated seasonal water flow, potential food sources, and areas avoided by local predators. Meanwhile, across the moon's surface, the other cadet teams were facing their first serious challenges. Team 3, led by Verix, had established an impressive defensive position on a plateau. Their heavy weapon, a plasma cannon, was prominently displayed, ready to incinerate any threat. They had followed the textbook approach to survival on hostile terrain: secure high ground, establish perimeter, conserve resources. What the textbook failed to account for was Xerath 9's unique weather patterns. The dust storm hit without warning. A wall of microscopic particles accelerated to lethal velocities by the canyon wind systems. Even with their enhanced respiratory filters and protective gear, Team 3 was forced to abandon their position, blindly stumbling through the tempest toward whatever shelter they could find. In their haste, they entered territory they would have normally avoided, the hunting grounds of a Carvon strider. The massive predator, weighing approximately 400 kilograms, was perfectly adapted to Xerath's harsh conditions. Its 6 muscular limbs ended in hooked claws designed for gripping rock and prey alike. Bony plates armored its spine and skull, while sensory pits along its jaw detected the faintest vibrations through ground or air. It sensed the cadets long before they saw it. Verix was the first to spot the danger, a shadow detaching itself from the swirling dust, moving with terrible purpose toward his team. "A defensive formation," he shouted, his voice barely audible over the howling wind. "Gren, ready the plasma cannon!" But Gren, their weapons specialist, had become separated in the storm. Only Verix and 2 others remained: Talia, a proximan with enhanced vision, and Drav, a bulky humanoid from a high-gravity world. The Carvon strider circled them, its movements calculated, patient. It had evolved to hunt in dust storms, using the limited visibility to its advantage. "Back to back," ordered Verix, drawing his sidearm. "Talia, can you get a lock with your targeting system?" "Negative," she replied, her augmented eyes struggling to penetrate the swirling particles. "Too much interference." The attack came with frightening speed. The strider lunged from the dust cloud, its front claws sweeping toward Drav. Despite his enhanced strength, the cadet was knocked backward, his reinforced armor scoring deep gouges against the rocks. Verix fired his sidearm, the energy pulses illuminating the storm in brief, blinding flashes. Most shots went wide, but one struck the creature's armored hide, leaving only a superficial burn. "It's too fast," Talia cried, her own weapon tracking uselessly as the strider circled again, now keeping low to the ground. Drav struggled to his feet, internal medical systems already administering pain suppressants for his injured arm. "We need to fall back, find better position." But there was nowhere to go. The storm had disoriented them completely, and the strider had them surrounded, cutting off retreat with each calculated movement. It was then that they heard it, a soft whistle, almost lost in the wind. Not a natural sound, but a signal. From the swirling dust emerged a small figure, moving with impossible precision through the storm. Kayla Wynn, her lower face covered with a makeshift filter, her eyes narrowed against the stinging particles. She appeared so suddenly that Varix almost fired at her before recognizing the academy uniform. "Wynn, what are you—" Kayla held up a hand for silence, her focus entirely on the predator. The Carvon Strider had paused its attack, head tilted as it assessed this new threat. It couldn't comprehend how prey would willingly approach, and the hesitation bought precious seconds. In those seconds, Kayla's mind calculated angles, force requirements, timing. Her breathing slowed, deepened. Time seemed to stretch as her consciousness narrowed to a single point of perfect focus. The Strider made its decision, abandoning the larger prey to eliminate this strange new threat. It gathered its massive body, muscles coiling beneath armored plates. Kayla stood motionless, apparently defenseless. "Move!" shouted Varix. "It's going to—" The Strider pounced, 400 kilograms of lethal predator launching through the air directly at the small human figure. What happened next occurred so quickly that the watching cadets would later disagree on the sequence of events. Kayla sidestepped, not away from the attack, but into it, at an angle so precise it seemed mathematically determined. Her body rotated, one hand grasping a protrusion on the Strider's armored hide while her legs swept beneath its center of gravity. Physics did the rest. The creature's own momentum, redirected by Kayla's perfectly timed movement, sent it crashing into a boulder. Before it could recover, she was on its back, knees pressing against specific nerve clusters beneath the armored plates. The Strider froze, immobilized by pressure on its nervous system. In 3 seconds, a 400-kilogram apex predator had been neutralized by an unenhanced human girl using nothing but leverage and anatomical knowledge. Kayla looked up at the stunned cadets, her expression unreadable behind her dust filter. "It will remain paralyzed for approximately 4 minutes," she said, her voice barely audible above the dying wind. "That should give you time to retrieve your weapons specialist and find proper shelter." With that, she slipped from the creature's back and began walking away. "Ooh, wait," Varix called after her, confusion evident in his voice. Where did you learn to—" But Kayla had already disappeared into the thinning dust, leaving them with their questions. The storm subsided an hour later, revealing the true extent of the damage to Team 3. Drav's injury, while not life-threatening, had compromised his combat effectiveness. Their equipment was coated in abrasive dust, requiring careful cleaning. Worst of all, they had still not located Gren or the plasma cannon. "We need to find him before nightfall," Talia insisted, her enhanced vision scanning the horizon. Temperatures dropped to lethal levels after dark. Varix nodded, his earlier bravado replaced by grim determination. The encounter with the Strider and Kayla's inexplicable intervention had shaken his confidence. "Spread out, 10-meter intervals. Look for any sign of his passage." They searched until the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the barren landscape. Finally, just as they were about to abandon hope, Drav spotted a flash of metal reflecting the dying light. Gren lay unconscious in a shallow depression, the plasma cannon still strapped to his back. His bioenhancements had automatically induced a protective coma when his oxygen levels dropped during the storm. "He's alive," confirmed Talia after checking his vital signs. "But we need to get him stabilized." As they worked to revive their teammate, none of them noticed the dark shapes gathering on the ridge above. Thornak pack beasts, smaller than the Strider but hunting in coordinated groups of 8 to 10 individuals. They had been drawn by the scent of Drav's blood and the electronic emissions from the cadets' equipment. The first attack came as twilight deepened into night. A barking howl, then shadows detaching from shadows, converging on the cadet's position. A defensive circle, Varix commanded, his training overriding fear. Talia, get the cannon operational. But the plasma weapon, designed for single, powerful shots against large targets, was ill-suited for repelling multiple fast-moving attackers. The first energy blast vaporized one Thornak but scattered the others, making them harder to target. The pack beasts were cunning, darting in to slash with razor-sharp appendages before retreating into darkness. Despite their enhanced reflexes and armor, the cadets were soon bleeding from multiple lacerations. Drav fell first, his injured arm making him vulnerable to a coordinated assault from 3 beasts. Talia was next, a Thornak leaping onto her back, jaws clamping down on her shoulder despite the reinforced material of her uniform. Varix fought with desperate fury, his scaled hide turning aside glancing attacks. But even he could not watch all directions at once. A pack beast circled behind him, tensing to spring at his exposed neck. The attack never came. Instead, a length of metal, a tent pole from a standard-issue survival kit, now sharpened to a wicked point, impaled the creature in mid-leap. It fell, thrashing, as a familiar figure emerged from the darkness. Kayla Wynn had returned. But this time, she was not alone. She had fashioned crude weapons from her limited supplies, the sharpened tent pole, a sling made from parachute cord, rocks wrapped in torn fabric to create makeshift bolas. More importantly, she had studied the Thornak's hunting patterns during her canyon trek. She knew their weaknesses. The Alpha, she said, pointing to a larger beast circling at the perimeter of the fight, has a neural cluster at the base of the spine. Immobilize it, and the pack will scatter. Varix stared at her in disbelief. That's not in any academy manual. Observed behavior, Kayla replied simply. Cover me. Before he could protest. She was moving, not with enhanced speed, but with a precision that made every step count. The sling whirled above her head, then released. A stone struck the Alpha Thornak's sensory organ, momentarily blinding it. In that instant of confusion, Kayla closed the distance. The beast recovered quickly, jaws snapping at her approach, but she was already sliding beneath its guard. The sharpened tent pole struck with surgical accuracy at the base of the creature's spine. Not to kill, just to paralyze. The Alpha collapsed, its limbs twitching uselessly. As Kayla had predicted, the effect on the pack was immediate. Without their leader's guidance, the remaining Thornaks broke formation, their coordinated attack dissolving into individual flight. Within moments, the cadets were alone with their wounded. Kayla didn't wait for thanks or explanations. She moved immediately to Talia, examining the bite wound with clinical detachment. Pressure here, she instructed Varix, guiding his hand to a specific point on Talia's shoulder. The venom glands are in the rear teeth. You need to prevent it from reaching her central circulation. Her fingers worked with quick efficiency, applying a coagulant from her medical kit to seal the punctures. Next, she moved to Drav, using strips torn from her own uniform to bind his wounds. How do you know all this? Varix finally asked, watching as she expertly treated injuries that would have challenged the Academy's medical staff. Kayla didn't look up from her work. I study. Nobody studies this, he insisted. This is beyond Academy curriculum. Even with neural implants and accelerated learning, cadets don't... I read the old texts, she interrupted, her voice still quiet but with an edge that silenced him. Before enhancements, before neural interfaces, humans learned through observation, practice, repetition. She finished bandaging Drav's arm and stood. Your team needs extraction. Use your emergency beacon. Varix's expression shifted from confusion to suspicion. What about you? Your solo mission? We'll continue, she said, already gathering her few possessions. My objectives are different from yours. Before he could respond, she pressed something into his hand, a small vial from her medical kit. For the pain, she explained. Natural compounds, not synthetic, more effective against Thornac venom. With that, she turned and walked back into the darkness, leaving Varric staring after her, the emergency beacon clutched forgotten in his other hand. It took nearly 3 hours for the Academy rescue shuttle to locate Team 3's signal through Xerath 9's electromagnetic interference. By then, Kayla was kilometers away, continuing her solitary journey through the canyon system. Her intervention had cost her valuable time and resources. The torn uniform provided less protection against the night's bitter cold. The expended medical supplies meant any injury she sustained would go untreated. But she had made her choice without hesitation. This was the true test. She knew. Not survival alone, but the choices made during survival. Her grandmother's most important lesson. Power without compassion is merely violence with a different name. The remaining hours of her field test passed in grueling progression. Kayla navigated through increasingly difficult terrain, avoiding predator territories when possible, using her growing knowledge of Xerath's ecosystem to find food and water. She fashioned new tools from the environment, bone shards from abandoned kills, fibers from desert plants, primitive weapons like those her ancestors had used millennia before the first starship left Earth. On the final day, she reached her designated extraction point 6 hours ahead of schedule. Rather than signaling for pickup, she used the time to establish a small camp and reflect on what she had learned. She had not merely survived Xerath 9, she had come to understand it. This harsh alien landscape had become, in some small way, an extension of herself. Every challenge it presented had been met not with technological solutions but with human adaptability. When the Academy shuttle finally arrived, Kayla boarded without fanfare, taking her seat among the retrieved equipment cases rather than with the jubilant returning cadets. If anyone noticed her torn uniform or the new, primitive tools at her belt, they made no comment. Back at the Academy, the aftermath of the field survival test unfolded in ways no one had anticipated. Sergeant Zoran sat alone in the monitoring station, reviewing footage for his final assessments. The screens showed various cadet teams during their ordeal. Moments of triumph, failure, fear, courage, standard evaluations for determining who would advance and who would be cut from the program. Cut. But Zoran's attention was fixed on a particular sequence, Kayla Wynn confronting the Carvon Strider. He had watched it 17 times now, at various speeds and from multiple angles. Each viewing revealed new details that defied conventional explanation. The timing of her movements, perfect. Not just good or excellent, but mathematically precise in a way that even the most advanced bio-enhancements couldn't guarantee. Every shift of weight, every point of contact with the predator, calculated to use minimum force for maximum effect. More disturbing was the evidence that this wasn't luck or instinct. The positioning of her hands indicated intimate knowledge of Carvon physiology, knowledge not included in cadet briefing materials. The paralysis technique she employed was documented only in classified xenobiology archives, restricted to senior officers. Zoran's mandibles clicked in agitation as he initiated a deeper background check on Cadet Wynn. Her application materials had been standard, unremarkable academic performance at a mid-tier Earth institution, no notable achievements, no family history of military service, nothing to suggest exceptional combat potential. Yet the footage told a different story. This was not a novice getting lucky. This was expertise disguised as inexperience. The query results appeared on his screen, and Zoran's compound eyes widened slightly. There was a footnote he had missed in her file, a single reference that hadn't seemed significant during initial processing. Kayla Wynn's grandmother, Mara Wynn Nguyen, former xenobiologist, specialized in predator species adaptation, retired from service 30 years ago after classified field work on Zareth 9. The pieces began to align in Zoran's mind. Not enhancement technology, but something older, more fundamental. Generational knowledge. The grandmother had studied Zareth's predators. Somehow, she had passed that knowledge to her granddaughter, along with something else, a methodology, a discipline, a way of moving through the world without relying on artificial augmentation. Zoran closed the file and leaned back, his exoskeleton creaking slightly. In all his years at the academy, he had never encountered anything quite like this. The regulations were clear. Cadets needed biomodifications to meet the physical demands of modern combat. But what if those regulations were based on a flawed assumption? What if human potential, properly harnessed, could achieve comparable results through different means? He would need to bring this to the military council. The council chamber was imposing by design, a semicircular arrangement of elevated seats facing a central podium. Holographic displays hovered above each council member, showing real-time data relevant to the proceedings. Attendance was restricted to senior academy staff and those specifically summoned to testify. Sergeant Zoran stood at the podium, his presentation materials organized before him. As drill sergeant, his recommendations carried significant weight in cadet evaluations. But what he was proposing went beyond standard assessment. "Honored Council," he began, his voice modulated to project authority. "I come before you regarding an exceptional case that challenges our established protocols." The head of the council, Admiral Vex, nodded for him to continue. Her cybernetic enhancements gleamed under the chamber lights, testament to decades of military service across multiple conflict zones. A Cadet Kayla Wynn of Earth has completed the field survival test without any biomodifications whatsoever, Zoran stated, activating the main display screen. Not only completed, but excelled in ways that warrant special consideration. The footage began playing, Kayla's encounter with the Strider, followed by her intervention with Team 3 against the Thornak pack. The council watched in silence, their expressions unreadable. "As you can see," Zoran continued, "her performance demonstrates mastery of combat techniques typically accessible only to enhanced individuals. More significantly, she displayed knowledge of xenobiology and tactical assessment beyond standard academy curriculum." Admiral Vex leaned forward, her augmented eyes focusing on a frozen frame of Kayla immobilizing the Strider. "You're certain there was no technological assistance? No hidden enhancements?" "Confirmed by multiple scans, Admiral, she is completely unmodified." Another council member, Dr. Sennett, raised a hand. His specialized neural interfaces pulsed with activity as he processed the information. "If I may, Sergeant, what exactly are you proposing? An exemption from Regulation 5.78? Zoran's mandibles clicked once, a gesture of affirmation. "More than an exemption, Doctor. I am proposing we recognize a different path to combat readiness, one based not on technological enhancement, but on disciplined development of natural abilities." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. What Zoran was suggesting represented a fundamental shift in academy philosophy. For generations, the path to military excellence had been clear. Biological limitations were overcome through technological means. The idea that those limitations might be overcome through training alone was revolutionary. "And you believe this single cadet justifies such a radical reconsideration?" asked Admiral Vex, skepticism evident in her tone. "I believe she represents potential we have overlooked." Zoran replied steadily. Cadet Wynn has demonstrated capabilities that match or exceed those of her enhanced peers, using methods we barely understand. At minimum, this warrants further study. The council deliberated among themselves, neural interfaces allowing them to share thoughts at speeds no unenhanced being could follow. Finally, Admiral Vex addressed Zoran again. "Your recommendation, Sergeant, specifically." Zoran stood straighter, his forearms clasped in formal military posture. "I recommend Cadet Wynn be granted accelerated advancement to specialized training, with commendation for exceptional performance. Furthermore, I propose establishment of a pilot program to explore non-enhanced combat methodologies, with Cadet Wynn as primary subject." The silence that followed was heavy with implication. What Zoran proposed wasn't merely administrative, it was philosophical, a challenge to the very foundation of the Academy's approach to warrior development. "Bring in the cadet," Admiral Vex finally ordered. Moments later, Kayla Wynn stood before the council, her posture perfect, eyes forward. If she felt any anxiety at being summoned before the highest authority at the Academy, she showed no sign of it. "Cadet Wynn," began Admiral Vex, "Sergeant Zoran has made extraordinary claims regarding your performance on Zareth 9, claims that, if substantiated, could alter Academy policy. Do you understand the significance of this?" "Yes, Admiral," Kayla replied, her voice clear but quiet. "Then perhaps you can explain how an unmodified human cadet managed to neutralize a Karvan Strider using techniques not taught in any Academy curriculum." Kayla's gaze remained steady. "My grandmother served as a xenobiologist on Zareth 9, Admiral. She documented predator behaviors and physiological weaknesses. After retirement, she established a training methodology based on her findings, a system designed to maximize natural human potential without technological intervention. And she taught this system to you," Admiral Vex stated, not a question. "Yes, Admiral, from childhood." Dr. Sanat leaned forward, neural interfaces pulsing with increased activity. "This methodology, it goes beyond combat techniques? It is holistic," Kayla confirmed. "Breathing control, muscle memory development, sensory acuity training, pain management, tactical assessment under stress, every aspect of human function, optimized through disciplined practice. And you believe this traditional approach can compete with modern enhancement technology?" There was no mockery in Admiral Vex's tone, only genuine curiosity. Kayla considered her words carefully before responding. "I believe diversity of approach creates resilience. Admiral, enhanced warriors excel in their domain. Traditionally trained humans excel in others. Together, they form a more adaptable fighting force than either alone." The council members exchanged glances, impressed despite themselves by the cadet's measured response. "One final question. Cadet," said Admiral Vex, "why did you choose to rescue Team 3 knowing it compromised your own mission parameters?" For the first time, Kayla's composure wavered slightly. "With respect, Admiral, I did not see it as a compromise. The objective of the field survival test is to evaluate our capacity as warriors. A warrior who abandons allies to secure personal advancement has failed regardless of whether they reach the extraction point." A subtle shift occurred in the chamber, a new quality of attention directed at the small human standing before them. It was not her combat prowess that had changed the atmosphere, but the philosophy underlying it. Admiral Vex nodded slowly. "Thank you for your candor. Cadet Wynn, you are dismissed. The council will deliberate on Sergeant Zoran's recommendations." Kayla saluted crisply and exited the chamber, leaving the council to determine not just her fate, but potentially the future direction of the Academy itself. The decision came 3 days later. Kayla was summoned to Sergeant Zoran's office, A spartanly furnished room dominated by displays showing training metrics and cadet evaluations. The drill sergeant stood as she entered, his posture formal but lacking the intimidating quality he typically projected. "Cadet Wynn," he began. "The council has reached its decision regarding your status." Kayla stood at attention, face impassive. "Effective immediately. You are advanced to specialized combat training, with full commendation entered into your permanent record." Zoran's mandibles clicked in what might have been approval. "Additionally, you have been selected as the inaugural participant in the Non-Enhanced Combat Excellence Program, a new initiative to explore alternative approaches to warrior development." A flicker of surprise crossed Kayla's features, the most emotion she had displayed since arriving at the academy. "The council believes your grandmother's methodology may have applications beyond individual combat proficiency." Zoran continued. "You will be expected to document your training techniques and collaborate with academy researchers to formalize the system for potential broader implementation." "I understand, Sergeant," Kayla replied, processing the implications. This wasn't merely personal advancement, it was validation of her grandmother's life work, a legacy previously known only to their family, now recognized at the highest levels of the Intergalactic Combat Academy. "There's more," Zoran added, something almost like respect in his multifaceted eyes. "Upon completion of your specialized training, you will be offered position as Earth's representative in the Vanguard Initiative." Kayla couldn't hide her shock this time. The Vanguard Initiative was the Academy's elite deployment force, first responders to crises throughout the galaxy. Selection was typically restricted to graduates with years of field experience. "May I ask why, Sergeant?" she ventured. Zoran considered her for a moment before responding. "The Vanguard faces situations where technology fails, where enhancements malfunction, where warriors must rely on more fundamental capabilities. Your demonstration on Zareth 9 suggested you already possess those capabilities." He handed her a datapad containing her new assignment details. "Report to Training Center 7 tomorrow at 600 hours. Your new regimen begins then." Kayla accepted the datapad with a formal salute. "Thank you, Sergeant." As she turned to leave, Zoran added one final comment. "Your grandmother would be proud, Cadet Wynn." Kayla paused at the door, a small smile, her first since arriving at the academy, briefly crossing her face. "She is, Sergeant. She's the one who submitted my application." The social ramifications of the council's decision rippled through the academy with surprising speed. By the time Kayla returned to the cadet quarters, everyone had heard about her advancement and the new program built around her training methodology. The reactions were mixed. Some cadets, particularly those who had witnessed her skills firsthand on Zareth 9, approached with newfound respect, eager to learn more about her techniques. Others maintained distance, uncomfortable with the challenge she represented to the enhancement paradigm they had embraced. Varix, surprisingly, was among the first to acknowledge her publicly. He intercepted her in the main corridor, his reptilian features set in an expression of formal deference. "Hey, Cadet Wynn," he began, his usual mockery absent. "I owe you my team's lives, and that debt will not be forgotten." Kayla regarded him steadily. "There is no debt, Cadet Varix. We serve together." "Nevertheless," he insisted, "you have taught me something valuable. Enhancement without wisdom is merely decorated weakness." He extended his hand, a human gesture he had clearly studied for this moment. "I would learn from you, if you are willing to teach." Around them, other cadets watched the exchange with interest. Varix was influential among the enhanced faction. His acceptance of Kayla signaled permission for others to do the same. Kayla accepted his handshake with a nod. "Training Center 7 or 500 hours before my official session begins. Bring only yourself. No equipment. As word spread, more cadets began approaching her with similar requests. By evening, a small but diverse group had arranged to join these unofficial pre-dawn sessions. Kaylin, the insectoid cadet who had first noticed her unusual movements, was particularly enthusiastic. "I've been studying your breathing patterns," he admitted, his sensory antennae twitching with excitement. "The way you synchronize respiration with movement creates efficiency no enhancement can match." Kayla smiled slightly. "That's just the beginning." The academy itself was changing too, if subtly. Instructors who had previously dismissed her now requested her input during tactical discussions. Combat simulations were modified to include scenarios where enhancements failed, testing cadets' fundamental capabilities. Most significantly, a small but growing number of incoming cadets began deferring their biomodification procedures, citing interest in the non-enhanced combat excellence program. The long-held assumption that enhancement was the only path to military advancement had been irrevocably challenged. That night, Kayla returned to her quarters after a long day of briefings and preparations for her new role. The room was empty. Her former bunkmates had all been reassigned to specialized training of their own, in different facilities. She sat on her bunk, finally alone with her thoughts. From the pocket of her uniform, she withdrew a small holographic projector, one of the few personal items she had brought from Earth. Activated, it displayed an image of an elderly woman with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. "We did it, Benoy," Kayla whispered to her grandmother's image. "They're listening now." The hologram couldn't respond, of course, but Kayla imagined what Mara Win Nguyen would say. "Remember why we started this journey, little one. Not for recognition, not for advancement, but because humanity needs to remember its own strength." Kayla nodded to herself, tucking the projector away and preparing for sleep. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to demonstrate what human potential truly meant when cultivated with discipline and purpose. As she closed her eyes, the lights in her quarters dimmed automatically and briefly flickered, just as they had when she first arrived at the academy. A small reminder of connections not fully understood, powers not yet fully realized. In the silence of her room, the quietest cadet smiled. The real work was just beginning.